government must and will come, for there is no other remedy for the world's sickness. The machinery for it is not difficult to devise. It can be an extension of the federal principle, the growth of the ideas underlying the United Nations, giving each national unit freedom to fashion its identity according to its genius, but subject always to the basic covenant of a world government. Now, the elements of the Federation of Nations of the world government that Gandhi envisaged in his various writings were to some extent reflected in the United Nations. After all, General Assembly was remains the universal organization representing all the nations of the world. Security Council has elements of hegemony in the form of the retention of the veto power. But there are provisions in the UN Charter gradually to get over this element. Then there is a UN's overarching role in the world in the field of economic development, where in Article 47 it says that all the 57, sorry, that all the specialized agencies shall be brought into association with you, and that UN, if necessary, will create other specialized agencies by convening special conferences. And as you know that the first special conference that was convened by the first resolution adopted by the Economic and Social Council was the Conference on Commerce and Economy, Trade and Economy, the Havana Conference. And the Havana Conference, interestingly, dealt with many of the problems of the capitalist system. And there were provisions were made as to how to deal with them, and that was in the chapter on restrictive business practices. And we normally forget that chapter when we think of regulating the activities of multinational corporations these days. But there were distortions introduced in the UN in many areas with the passage of time. And one of the biggest distortions introduced, which Nehru foresaw straight away, was the perpetuation of the Cold War in another form. And this means that an attempt not to restructure the world system, but to tinker with it and to retain it in a form which can serve the interest of the major powers. And he foresaw that. The other thing that he foresaw was the complication introduced by the arms race. And he came to the conclusion that all talk of Federation of Nations and world government would be futile until action was taken to bring about disarmament. One thing quite remarkable about Nehru in all fields of activities, as has been pointed out by Professor Madan, was that there was no dichotomy between what he wrote and enunciated in his very well thought out writings. And I can cite some remarkable piece of writing by him on the world order, on the armament, the move from Quadda, which really enunciates complete and total disarmament in a manner in which it has not been done since then. And all the efforts made since then do not even add up to what is in that Quadda book. Confucius wrote from Quadda, I think date is 1924. And similarly, there are other, when the nuclear test was withdrawn by the United States, they wrote anonymously the famous editorial in the National Herald was the death dealer. And if you read the death dealer, then you can really appreciate the kind of abhorrence that he had of the arms race. And he devoted a very good part of his life, later part of his life, in bringing about disarmament. And I will give you only one example, but we'll go on talking about it. And that was when this editorial entitled Death Dealer appeared in the National Herald. Next year he spoke to the Parliament and presented I would say a complete plan for preventing nuclear weapons. But at that stage, a quite well-developed plan to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. And this same evening, he made the Foreign Office write a letter to our permanent representative in New York, Mr. Chakravarti of the Permanent District, to forward it to the Secretary General, making the following proposals. And the proposals were pursued later on, and I will not try to go into that. Just one or two elements I will mention. Panditji tried to apply some of the Gandhian ideas to rationalizing and explaining the notion of world order he had in view, he had propounded separately. And these were the ideals of truth, non-violence, peaceful existence, and fearlessness. And if you see, he used the argument about fear in his characterization of the doctrine of deterrence. He used the argument about the military alliances in the world as an example of denial of peace and coexistence. And the influence of these Gandhian ideas was so deep in his mind that he repeatedly went to them in trying to explain his position in all these areas. Now, I shall conclude by just giving a summary of what I have said. Never a clear vision of an international order which would replace the capitalist system which had been rendered outmoded by the changes brought about by science and technology and was on the verge of collapse due to inherent contradictions. Whereas the capitalist system was characterized by competition, conflict, and exploitation, the international order whose vision would be based on cooperation, interdependence, and distributed justice. The new international order would also be based on the fundamental principle of truth, non-violence, tolerance, fearlessness, and common good. Democracy, that is the universality of the institutions underpinning it, would be its essence. Nehru strongly believed in the notion of world government in the form of a federation of free nations. This should emerge from the United Nations. Developments in the post-Second World War period, particularly the onset of the Cold War and the nuclear arms race, led Nehru to temper his belief in the inevitability of new international order. He saw enormous difficulties in realizing the idea, but never gave it up and maintained his faith in it. He regarded disarmament as a precondition for creating the world government. He worked relentlessly till the end of his life for achieving disarmament, particularly for arresting the nuclear arms race. Now the world today, the situation in the world today is again much less conducive to realizing the notion of the international order that Nehru had in his mind. And I do not go into the details of what has happened to the UN, what has happened to the collapse of values. But the question arises does that mean that we should give up that idea? That there should be no champion of that idea simply because it is becoming much more difficult to realize that. So the basic issue to debate, following the points that I have made, is this particular one, and I will be very happy to join this debate if it is raised from before.
Friends, I'm reminded of a book, The Last Two Prisoners, which is titled In Defense of Politics. And the author is a man called Bernard. And the sentences are these. Sir Winston Churchill left 10 Downing Street. The new occupant is Sir Anthony Eden, but Thomas still breaks the code. If I am to extrapolate it, as it happened to be yesterday, when the occupant of 7 race codes were changed, Dr. Manmohan Singh left, 7 race codes wrote. Mr. Narendra Modi is the new occupant, but Mr. Dayaram still sells Mufel. The point here is that political changes will take place, but social transformation may not take place. Things will go on as it is. Now, I want to tell you very briefly on what is happening about the idea of India as visualized, conceptualized by Nehru and his contemporaries. And where are we now going? The idea of India is usually referred to as the notions of unity and diversity, cultural symbiosis, synthetic culture, and the like. And when we usually refer to the elements of culture, we have mainly in mind 2 things. One is religion, the other is language. And this idea that I am referring to is not exclusive to Jawaharlal Nehru, but also partly drawn from Mohandas Karamchand. I hope you appreciate why I have to put the whole name. Mohandas Karamchand, and not simply that. In Hind Swaraj, Gandhiji has said, and I quote, if the Hindus believe that only Hindus should people India, they are living in a dreamland. And goes on to say that those who have made India their country are all fellow countrymen. And this is extremely different. Similarly, Nehru in his eloquent prose in Discovery of India notes that it is fascinating to find how numerous linguistic groups have retained their peculiar characteristics for hundreds of years, yet remain distinctly Indian, with the same national heritage and the same set of moral and mental qualities and practical equality. This was a kind of India which was there. The idea of India is qualitatively different from the notion of nation states, which was initiated in Western Europe and spread to the rest of the world thereafter. The quaternality between political and cultural boundaries were assumed in that notion. But we have an entirely different situation. And I don't know, probably Sujata said, the notion of secularism, which is certainly stigmatized these days, is not the notion which was prevailing in Europe, but a notion which was conditioned to absorb the reality of India. Similarly, I believe, although political science still latch onto the phrase nation state, it is utterly unacceptable or doesn't fit into the reality of India. Because if they thought of nation states where the two boundaries, cultural and political boundaries, coexisted, it's quite different in India. And it was cultural diversity, cultural pluralism, coupled with equity as a value orientation, even equality, which was really nourished the idea of India. But now we see another idea of India, which is also existing for quite some time. The idea of India as one nation, one people, one culture. And you will know from where it is. The idea which was articulated by mainly, not exclusively, two ideologues of RSS, Golwalkar and Savarkar. And according to Golwalkar, I got a slice, what a percentage. In this country, Hindus alone are national, and Muslims and others, religious minorities, who are followers of non-Indian religions, if not actually anti-national, are at least outside the body of the nation. And who are the Hindus? Hindus are those who follow those religions which are native to India, which include certainly Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, and that is how the idea of one nation, one people, one culture is evolved. So these were two contrasting ideas, notions about India in competition. And the idea of Hindu is very closely associated with the RSS idea of one nation, one culture. And this very neatly fits in with the notion of nation state of Western Europe. And so if you need to do something different, I will not go into it. You don't have to be told about it. Now, these two ideas of India, those of cultural pluralism and cultural monism, were in acute political competition throughout 20th century. But the idea of cultural pluralism had an upper hand, you all know that. And at the moment, in terms of what I said just now, I'm not looking at the 2014 general elections, cultural monism seems to be taking an upper hand. And it's very important to reflect on this as we are remembering well the 50th year of this past. For the first time in the 2014 elections, the Nehruvian idea, or the Nehruvian idea of India has weakened, if not, has become an endangered species. To unfold this, we need to look at the four zones of India closely. I am sure you all read these papers. And it reports the northern and western zones together have 298 Lok Sabha seats, and BJP bagged 261. A couple of persons they have not done that. In southern and eastern zones, out of the 242 Lok Sabha seats, BJP got only 75 seats. It's very interesting to look at it carefully. I don't think it's able to inspire a large number of articulations, both in the media, both the electronic media and the print media. It is very interesting to remind our listeners that the Hindutva ideology as a higher purchase in the North and West India in terms of the number of seats. I hope some of you would at least know that contrary to what we normally think, there is a cleavage, a wedge between what I call Aryan Hinduism and Dravidian Hinduism. And people don't, well, I don't say they don't understand it, they don't want to understand it. In the northern and western zones, where the Hindutva ideology seems to be salient at the moment, the languages spoken are Indo-Aryan languages. And it is Aryan Hinduism which is very much prevailing. In contrast, in south and east, it is Dravidian Hinduism. And the primal vision of the Indian people, you look at the states, including northeast and people, a large number of our Adivasi population, which is only 8% of the population, are found. That is, if one deciphers the cultural meaning of the two competing ideas of India, which have called cultural pluralism and cultural monism, we can discern that they hinge on the political process with substantial. But most analysts, as I said, have either not understood it or have overlooked this because of their, to recall the famous phrase of Veblen, their trained incapacity. They are all trained and incapacitated. Look at people of conference in particular ways. Now, the chair is ready with the chits, but I'm going to stop. Now, the first Prime Minister of India, who is the hero today in our reflection, not only conceptualized India, but he also took definite practical steps to translate the idea of India, of his consumption, and of course the consumption which is shared with Govinda's currently done. As per Indian census, 82% of Indians identify themselves as Hindus, but Hinduism is not official or national religion in this country. Think of most so-called advanced secular countries of the world. All of them have an official religion. Even the Soviet Union, when I visited in the 1960s, although Orthodox Christianity was not officially accepted, that was practically the national religion. The religious pets were given important positions politically. Even today, if you go to Sri Lanka, as soon as you arrive, you will come across a few sofas covered with splendid white cloth. I asked my first visit years ago, for whom this is meant for? Then for Buddhist monks. You don't have any such things. Similarly, in spite of considerable political pressure, Hindi is not the sole official language. We have 21 other languages. Tell me one country, Upper Sri Lanka has 2 official languages. But no country in the world has more than 1. The multicultural United States of America has 1 language. And I've been there several times when the Spanish-speaking people from Mexican side wanted Spanish as a second language. The great people, the great Democrats of the United States of America denied it. But we have 22 officially recognized languages. But for Pandit Nehru, we could have had a different situation. You all know it, I don't know. The fact that Hinduism is not our official or national religion. The fact that we have as many as 22 languages accepted as official languages in this country is something which we should remember or repeat, tell the younger people of this country that essentially what man and his name is Pandit Jawaharlal. But those good days seems to be receding into history. I'm not very sure. Culturally speaking, Aceh din ada pula. Thank you very much.
Thank you for so. Now we have.
Thank you very much. When I was first asked by Arun Kumar to come and speak here, I was very hesitant. I'm not an academic. I have no record of any sort of serious academic work on the program. And there's nothing that I can present to you which would constitute anything resembling any sort of serious research into the near years. My only claim to be here is that I grew up under the shadow that my generation was one which was Nehruvian because we frankly did not know any other model or idea of what it is to be educated. And that is the reason why perhaps I'm here. I never met her personally, except once there was an encounter. This was a seminar in Bombay University. Those were the days when prime ministers used to go to seminars and were willing to find time to talk to a group like this. We were not much more than this. I would say maybe a little bit, but we got in the conversation, not we might have been about 150 of us. I was a student in this college, and Pandit Nehru was speaking at the seminar, and he was there for 2 hours, and I was smuggling myself in. I was not supposed to. And in those days also, it was not that difficult. There was no security on it. Smuggling didn't involve anything more than just opening the door, marching and sitting down. And that's when the Prime Minister is up there speaking. I wanted to mention this because one of the key parts to us of Nehru was a sense of closeness that we felt. I lived in Bombay. Every time we came to Bombay, we would go in an open car. No security, nothing. And when he went past, you could see it easily. And that sense of closeness that we had was a very important part of what Nehru did for us as individuals. The seminar itself was meant to inaugurate a program on national integration. And I remember when Panditji started speaking, his strict accent, which I will not try and imitate. In his strict accent, he began by saying, national integration is not something that you can inaugurate. And the whole theme of his speech was essentially that it's a process, a historical process. And he treated us to a superb disposition on nationhood as a process of India's past, and in a sense what it is that we were doing. And I mentioned this because I think in some ways it was an important dimension of what drove his thinking on matters of not just economic policy, but social policy, foreign policy, also was driven by the notion that he saw himself as part of the business of making India a nation. And that he saw himself as part of something which had stretched back for a long period of time before and was going to stretch for a long period of time in the future. As I see it, in many ways, what we experienced was nearly driven by two things. One, how to stitch together a very diverse, perhaps even divided country through a web of interdependence. So that it would not just be one in a legal sense, but would become one in an economic, social, and political sense. This belief in democracy was part of it. The role that parliamentary democracy has played in stitching together this fabric that we call India is, I think, today's different. You take it for granted. You could not take it for granted in the 50s. Nobody has lived through the years of the struggles for states reorganization, now involvement. And if you saw the breakdown of law and order that you did in those days in then we used to sit cowering at home for weeks at a time. But the violence that was going on in the streets was not the case now. So I think do not underestimate the importance of Nehru's commitment to parliamentary democracy as the key dimension of this theme of it. And I'll say a bit more on the way in which his economic policies also aimed towards stitching together a country in a web of interdependence. And the second theme that, sense appeal to those of us who are, I suppose, upper class Indians, the upper middle class Indians, was his capacity to articulate independence in a real sense. The non-aligned movements, the various things that he did to assert India's capacity for advocating an independent foreign policy was an important dimension of building up the notion of India in our minds. A lot of the things that we appeal to. But let me focus a little bit more on my end, which is economic policy. Today, economists criticize them for an economic policy which focused, what they say, excessively on self-reliance, underestimated the possibilities of export-led growth, focused a bit too much on heavy industries and not enough on labor-intensive industries and so on. I would like to place this criticism in a broader context. Please remember that we started planning in 1950. This was a time when most of the West, other than the United States, was still in a process of recovery from the Second World War. Japan's GDP had not yet reached its pre-war level. Europe was still in a period of reconstruction. It would have to be a very brave man who would stand up and say that yes, it is possible to think in terms of high rates of export growth as a basis for growth. This just did not seem at all practical. And I know of nobody who argued that in 1950. People transposed an argument which became more plausible and relevant in the 60s into something which was a decade earlier. They tend to forget that we started with all of our process of development a decade before a lot of Southeast Asia and other parts of the world did. And this, therefore, was not an option. Look also at the outcome. Look at the record. Actually, India's growth rate between 1954 and 1964, the Nehru years, is not much lower than, fully comparable with the average for all developing countries. Yes, it is lower than what the many developing countries achieved later in the 60s, when the West was transformed, when the big boom had started, consumer-led boom had started in the West, which is what fueled high growth in Southeast Asia, in East and Southeast Asia. But that was not the case in the 50s. I would also argue that a light industry strategy could be a work. But it may even have exacerbated the sort of division between the north and the west and the south and the east, which also more was occurring. It could have textile industry of Ahmedabad would have possible. Perhaps light engineering industry of Chennai would have possible. But it would not have had development in most of the time. More than that, what he did with the heavy industry strategy was to tie together together Bihar with Bombay. Because Bombay depended on it. Tie together Calcutta and Chennai. In that sense, the whole strategy of heavy industry has to be seen as partly part of the political agenda of stitching together the big dams, the heavy industry, the big steel plants, and so on. Because they necessarily have to create national markets and national networks of machines. And I would therefore urge that we see it in that light. Let me also stress that this concept of self-reliance, which is also was very clearly articulated, particularly in the second plan, was not just a concept restricted to industry. It was a concept which was applied very forcefully in other areas, like science and technology, and education. And if you look at the period between 1954 and 61, it is utterly amazing the rate at which major new institutions were set up. One can't be referred to the 3 academies, what about the IITs, the IIMs, the industrial promotion, the institutions which were set up. And all of this are things that today we are benefiting and profiting from. You may criticize that policy of self-reliance in terms of today's economics. Please remember that what we are able to achieve today by would not have been possible without the capacities which were built through that. You know something, Lakshmi Mittal, the great steel magnate, he has made a great living out of buying up steel plants and out of big places. Most of his managers come from the Indian public sector. Because the Indian public sector has experience of running a steel plant under adverse circumstances. If you buy a Bhopal steel plant in Kazakhstan, who better than to get hold of an Indian public sector manager to put it back? Because they know how to do it. Those fellows are trained how to do it. No. You know, when Katrina struck in the only place it would get technicians, etc., to repair some of those wells in Croatia. And all that capacity was built up in the public sector. You tend to forget that. Then when we talk of heavy industries and public sector, do remember this, that behind the industrial, the machinery and the physical equipment, there was a huge amount of human capacity building. And today, if we are able to do much more, it is because of it. And I would urge that we see the Nehru's policy in this broad line of building a nation out of a very disparate, divided and diverse country. There were another dimension to this which I would refer to just in passing, which is probably quite important now. He was really taken by his rationality. His total absence of religiosity. In fact, almost a dogmatic rationalism, which he articulated. And he spoke in those days of the importance of promoting a scientific ethics. It's there in the Constitution. One of the directive principles of the Constitution enjoins the government to promote the scientific ethics. But it's rare, is almost. And the religiosity is widespread in society, in politics, in media, and elsewhere. But in a country like India, this the Nehru's nationalism is connected with this. Remember, this man was in natural science graduate. His Cambridge degree is actually in natural sciences. And then later he turned to law, studied law. So he had that sense. And what he did for Indian science is absolutely intact. Indian science would not be where it is today, and would not be for that passionate interest in science, in the scientific area, in humanism, in nationalism. On his foreign policy, Richmond has spoken extensively, and I do not need to dwell on that. I will only say this, that in some ways his economic policy was connected with his foreign policy. That in many ways a foreign policy which asserted the idea of national independence required an economic policy which asserted the importance of self-reliance. You cannot articulate a policy cannot articulate a policy of being independent of other blocks and countries and then be totally dependent on for your development. I'm not saying we succeeded fully in this, but this is one of the things which motivated. So in many ways, we were people who were swayed by this idea. And I don't think we abandoned it completely. Let me just end. I began on a personal note of the seminar, let me also end with this kind of a person. I was in London when Nehru died 50 years. I was a postgraduate student in London when Nehru died 50 years ago. And I had at that time, I was connected with foreign aid with a whole bunch of radical leftists. And then I saw me looking a little sad. They came to meet me and mocked, saying, why are you mourning the death of parents? And in some ways, we were just said bourgeois social democrat. It's the phrase that they use. And in some ways, they're right, except we succeeded. But unlike Zelensky, he succeeded. That he had consolidated and built up a bourgeois social democracy in this country. And that is what we are living in. Yes, it was a socialism. Simply what the radical socialism does. So, my plea is that we see Nehru as part of this process of what it is to have become what we are today. And I'm not saying that we ought to just simply repeat his policy now, though I do believe the basic themes of focusing on national integration as a continuing theme of policy, of focusing on asserting independence as an important dimension of foreign policy, will continue to remain, though the exact content of that may vary over time. So this is where I would like to end.
Friends, when Professor Arun Kumar invited me yesterday evening to come here, I was very happy and I accepted the invitation immediately. This was because mainly of two reasons. The first reason was that Nehru was my hero, like hero of many of us here. And the first time I saw Nehru was in 1945 in Simla, when he had come for the Simla conference. I was a student in Simla, and that was the first time we met all the national leaders. Almost anyone who was anyone in the politics was there in Simla at that time. And we went around collecting autographs, because that is what I was at that time 12 years old. That is what most of the children did. And that is how I got to know many of these leaders. And I remember Nehru's characteristic things. He would jump from the roof down, talk to people, meet people, which have all been described here by different people. So I agreed immediately. The second reason why I agreed immediately was because it was an invitation to a scientist. Because, unfortunately, in discourses in India, most of the discussion is done by non-scientists, never by a scientist. I remember at the India International Center a year or two ago, there was a discussion on nuclear power. There was not a single scientist in the speech panel. Professor Amartya Sen was there, Professor Krishna Kumar was there, everybody. That is because somehow scientists don't seem to talk about public policy and things like that. And the other people also seem slightly unhappy and uncomfortable when scientists are around. This came up again at another meeting in India International Center, where we had Professor Ashok Rajpai, Professor Krishna Kumar and various others talking about science and art. And I could see the strong defensiveness which these great artists and people felt about science. Somehow you feel scientists knows much more than he would do it. And the scientist thinks the other people know much more than the aeronautical. So this kind of duality has always been there. And Professor Arun Kumar, probably because he was himself a physicist and scientist at one time, brought this and invited me. So I'm really happy to be here. This whole thing is really part of a general theme which was discussed widely about 40 or 50 years ago, since many of us here are old. papers which Snow talked about. Dr. C.P. Snow talked about the idea of two cultures. He said there is one culture which only knows about Shakespeare. There is another culture which may be knowing Shakespeare but also knows the second law of thermodynamics. So these two cultures don't talk to each other, and that is the main reason at that time. So that was 40 or 50 years ago. What is the situation now? I have a feeling nobody knows about Shakespeare because in UK they have stopped teaching Shakespeare. India also I don't think we teach Shakespeare. Of course, everybody learns second law of thermodynamics in the 9th class or the 10th class, but they hardly understand it. They go ahead. And exactly what is the situation now, I have really no idea. Maybe since you are dealing more with students, you have some idea about it. Well, let me come to the covering the syllabus, as they say. I've been asked to speak about science and technology here. And what Nehru did for science and technology, I don't think any other political leader has ever done and will probably ever do. Because Nehru had, as many of you already mentioned, he was a naturally complete person. He had no defensiveness about science. Like I said earlier, most of us are very defensive about science. We haven't done science. But Nehru had no defensiveness. Of course, he had done science earlier, and he was a complete person. And he also believed in finding a good person, giving him the responsibility, and forgetting all about it. He found several people, luckily, who interacted with him. First, of course, he had met with Professor Meghnad Saha. When Nehru was in the Congress and was in the Planning Commission, Meghnad Saha was a member of the Planning Commission. He knew Meghnad Saha well, but somehow they never really got on very well. But then he met C.V. Raman, but C.V. Raman always stayed aloof from any kind of social work. Then he met Homi Bhabha, and that really struck a spark. They both really got on extremely well, and he gave Homi Bhabha complete freedom. He could stay and have his office in Bombay, not in Delhi. He could be chief of atomic energy commission right from Bombay. And he could spend money the way he liked. And so much freedom was given to Bhabha. And Bhabha also followed the same philosophy that Nehru had. He chose the best people and gave them full responsibility. One of the persons who died recently, Professor Obaid Siddiqui, was hired by Bhabha almost because some eminent person praised him and immediately took him over and did him extremely well. And amazingly, both Bhabha and Nehru were not in favor of the bomb. They were in favor of disarmament, as Mujkul Dubey has told us. And at that time, Nehru died in 64, Bhabha died in 66. Till 66, there was really no question of making any bomb. We were really trying to tell others not to make the bomb. We had a big conference organized by Homi Bhabha on fusion, what fusion can bring for us. And the whole idea was, and Nehru went out of the way to ask Professor D.S. Kothari to write a book on nuclear explosions. Tell them how bad explosions can be. So Professor Kothari wrote a book on nuclear explosions, one of the very first one, which described the horrors of nuclear war. But of course, the way politics have gone, we have had to make a bomb. And I also am not in disagreement with that, and we had to make and do everything else. But this was all after Nehru. And another person that was S.S. Bhatnagar. S.S. Bhatnagar was the person who set up all the laboratories, national laboratories in the country. Of course, he died in 1955, so it was a bit early, but almost all the fruits of the laboratories which are now enjoying were because of S.S. Bhatnagar. Then he chose D.S. Kothari. D.S. Kothari set up all the defense labs in the country. Unfortunately, he could not do anything much about education or higher education. That is because education is an impossible subject. Even now, we are not been able to solve it. How to communicate education, how to teach education, how to really make a person achieve his potential by education. This was about science. And because of his, rather not Nehru's, but because of Bhabha's and other people's accent on societies independent of universities, our universities suffered.